Good morning. Welcome to today's first lesson on strategy number 9 by annual fraud stroke corruption risk assessments. What do I mean by annual? By annual means every 6 months or every 6 years, 2 years, sorry. By annual means every 6 months or every 2 years. But in this context of risk assessment, I'm talking about every 6 months or twice a year. It is recommended that organizations carry out fraud stroke corruption risk assessments twice a year or once a year at most. What is risk assessment? I can equate risk assessment to a medical checkup. The medics do tell us that if you do carry out a medical checkup every year or after every 6 months, you have the greatest likelihood of discovering diseases early enough. And as they say, there is no cure for cancer. Many cancers do not have any cure. But if you discover them early, then they say you can have high likelihood, high probability of getting cured or having better management for the cancer so that you live long, very long with the cancer. The same happens to organizations when it comes to fraud or corruption. If you do carry out risk assessment, which is equivalent to a medical checkup frequently and regularly, then you have the greatest likelihood or probability that you detect fraud or corruption at its early stages. And according to research, fraud starts low. The fraudsters start taking little amounts. As they gain confidence, they increase the amounts. So the earlier detection, the better. And this is where fraud risk assessment will come in. Risk assessment will also reveal the loopholes in the internal control and the internal security systems so that the management may come up with the improved measures so that the loopholes are sealed and therefore preventing fraud. Therefore, the function of fraud or corruption risk assessment in organizations are: one, to assist in early detection; number two, to assist in detecting loopholes and then seal them up before they are taken advantage of by the fraudsters to inflict losses on the organization. Fraud risk assessments is strategy number 9. Strategy number 9, and according to its importance and these two functions of early detection and the discovery of loopholes and sealing them before they are used to defraud the organization, I take this to be strategy number 1. When ranked according to importance, strategy number 9, fraud or risk assessment, can be ranked as strategy number 1. Periodically, The latest major fraud hits the headlines as other organizations sit back and watch, telling themselves that it couldn't happen here. Many organizations just read on the newspapers that fraud are hitting at organizations, and then to console themselves, they say, no, we have the best systems here, we have the best staff, and therefore it cannot happen here. These are the those people I call city executives. You cannot be sure that you are okay before you take a medical checkup. You will feel hurt. You will feel you are not you are not paining anywhere, but you have diseases which have already germinated in the body and they are eating your system up, consuming your immune system before you start feeling pain. By the time you start feeling pain, it is too late. It could be too late. The same does happen to organizations before organizations carry out fraud or corruption risk assessment. They cannot be sure that they are okay because fraud could be going on as they say that it couldn't happen here. The reality is that fraud can happen anywhere where there are human beings and the devil's factor. While only relatively few major frauds are picked up by the media, huge sums are lost by all kinds of businesses as a result of the high number of small frauds that are committed. Surveys are regularly carried out in an attempt to estimate the true scale and cost of fraud to business and society. Findings vary, and it is difficult to obtain complete picture as to the full extent of the issue. But these surveys all indicate fraud is prevalent within organizations and it remains a serious and a costly problem. The risks of fraud may only be increasing as we see growing globalization, more competitive markets, rapid developments in technology, and the periods of economic difficulty. Despite the serious risk that fraud presents to business, many organizations still do not have formal systems and procedures in place to prevent, detect, and respond to fraud. While no system is completely foolproof, there are steps which can be taken to deter fraud and make it much less attractive to commit. It is in assisting organizations in taking such steps that this guide should prove valuable. The original guide to good practice was based on the work of SEMA's Fraud and Risk Management Working Group that was established as part of the Institute's response to the problem of fraud. Since the publication of the original guide, we have continued to see high profile accounting scandals and unacceptable levels of fraudulent behavior. This second, the second edition of the guide includes updates to reflect the many changes in the legal environment and the governance agenda in recent years aimed at tackling the ongoing problem of fraud. The guide starts by defining fraud and giving an overview of the extent of fraud, its causes, and its effects. The initial, the initial stages of the guide also set out the legal environment with respect to fraud, corruption, governance requirements, and the general risk management principles. The guide goes on to discuss the key components of anti-fraud strategy and outlines methods of preventing, detecting, and responding to fraud. A number of case studies are included throughout the guide to support a text demonstrating real-life problems that fraud presents and giving examples of actions organizations are taking to fight fraud. With the above in mind, what is fraud risk assessment? Fraud risk assessment is defined by www.witham.com stroke resources. What is a fraud risk assessment? As a tool used by management to identify and understand the risks to its business and weaknesses in controls that present a fraud risk to the organization. Once a risk is identified, a plan can be developed to mitigate those risks by instituting controls and procedures and assigning individuals to monitor and effect, effect the plan of mitigation. The main steps in fraud risk assessment are: number one, identification of key subsections of the organization. This is important since each section or department is likely to have its unique control challenges. The main sections or departments of an organization or a business are finance and accounting, B, procurement, C, human resources, D, internal audit and compliance, E, internal security. Number two, develop questions to ask the answer to which will reveal strengths and weaknesses of the internal controls in place. Number three, carry out the actual survey or administration of the questions in step number two. Number four, analysis of the answers. Number five, outlining the conclusions and recommendations. Number six, reviewing the outcomes of the survey. Number seven, consider the surveying again to clear the outstanding areas or to seek clarification. Fraud and corruption risk assessment. Many organizations do not understand the importance of fraud or corruption risk assessment. Majority of them think that any amount spent on risk assessment is wasted, but they often get victimized to the tune of millions of unbudgeted for. An organization that has never carried out a risk assessment has fraud or corruption cases running right now undetected. What is fraud or corruption risk assessment? I simply define fraud and corruption risk assessment as all those processes, procedures, and all tests that are undertaken to identify the presence or absence of weaknesses or loopholes in the systems, procedures, or policies of an organization that are likely to lead to perpetration of fraud or corruption. In other words, fraud or corruption risk assessment is like carrying out a medical health check or examination. Fraud or corruption risk assessment can also be defined or be referred to as proactive fraud or corruption auditing. Fraud or corruption risk assessment is becoming a common practice in organizations that are serious in the fight against fraud and corruption. It is important to utilize the main objectives of risk policy before delving into this into risk assessment. Sorry, the the objectives of risk policy are as follows. Number one, to ensure that an organization or business company has an active, structured, and commonly shared knowledge of risks that they have to manage through upward reporting from management, and that the priorities of the organization or business company in respect to the risks are fully communicated down within the organization or business company. Number two, to ensure that the management team at every level shares that understanding of risks and priorities. To ensure that the responsibility for the management of risks is assigned to staff to ensure that they are managed. Number four, to ensure that the risk management framework contributes to the preparation and implementation of internal controls. Number five, to ensure that internal financial operation and management systems directly support the management of risks that threaten the achievement of organization or business company objectives. Number six, to facilitate organization or business company management in to deal effectively with the future events that create uncertainty. Number eight, to foster risk awareness and proactive risk behavior. Number nine, to position management to proactively identify opportunities by considering a full range of potential events. Number 10, to ensure that the risk management framework is functioning efficiently and effectively integrates with organization or business company strategic planning processes and the performance management system. Number 11, to ensure that the resources are assigned to the management of risks in such a way to optimize value for money. Importance of periodic fraud and risk, uh, fraud and corruption risk management. The following are the benefits an organization can get from practicing periodic fraud and corruption risk assessment. Number one, identification of weaknesses in internal controls and security systems that might lead to financial wrongdoing. Number two, review of internal controls and security systems as a sort of number one above. Number three, timely discovery of ongoing frauds or corruption schemes. Fraud takes like an average of 5 to 10 years to discover in the absence of proactive fraud or corruption auditing. Number four, proactive internal controls and security system amendments due to number one and two above. Number five, minimization of fraud and corruption due to the increased perception of detection. When employees perceive that someone is watching and therefore any wrongdoing will be detected quickly, that could be the there could be fraudsters are deterred. Those who are intending to perpetrate fraud or corruption get deterred because they know that they will be detected in the next minute of their attempt at fraud and corruption. Fraud starts in small amounts and the frequency as well. So when fraud is detected early, the impact on an organization is minimized. Steps in fraud and corruption risk assessment. Effective fraud and corruption risk assessment has the following steps. Step number 1, assembly of the risk assessment team. Start by putting together the risk assessment team. The team must have the proper mix of skills, that is, security, financial, and digital investigative skills. Number 2, understanding the environment of the target organization. This will involve understanding the following: A, the nature of the organization's business; B, understanding the organization's internal control system; C, understanding the organization's internal security system; D, understanding the regulatory regime where the organization operates; and E, understanding the industry where the organization belongs. Number 2, identification of risks that the organization could be facing. The general risks that organizations face are as far as fraud and corruption is concerned. Sorry. The general risks that organizations face as far as fraud and corruption is concerned are: A, outright theft of assets; B, assets misappropriation; C, bribery; D, conflict of interest; E, illegal gratuity; F, espionage; G, cash larceny; H, scheming; I, robbery with violence; J, bid rigging; and K, computer data theft. Number 3, after having identified the main fraud or corruption risks, the organization's personnel in charge of the risk assessment and evaluation must sit down to A, estimate the potential loss or impact of each risk; B, also estimate the frequency of occurrence, risk probability, that is, of each risk; C, calculate the risk value; D, rank all risks according to their risks values depending in a descending order, and deal with high risks as a matter of urgency. The medium and the low risks must also be monitored since they might turn into high risks in the near future. Number 4, risk treatment or mitigation strategies. Once the risks have been ranked into high, medium, and low risks, then the mitigation process must start. The following are some of the leading mitigation measures. A, insurance cover. Taking insurance cover is one of the leading mitigation measures organizations can take, because it is like they are assigning responsibility of the losses that might occur to the insurance company. B, amendment and adjustment of internal controls and security systems. C, amend the fraud and corruption policy accordingly. D, employment of some staff to enhance segregation of duties. And E, training of employees on how to detect fraud or corruption danger signs and report them. Number 5, constant monitoring. There must be constant monitoring of the above mitigation measures to ensure that they are working as expected or as designed to work. Number 6, communicate. Compile a report of the findings and share with the board for perusal and implementation. The report should state and outline your findings and also recommendations. The board must act on the report promptly and also set the date for another risk assessment. It is good practice to the risk assessment as described above to be reported every 2 years, preferably by independent consultants, if financially feasible. Otherwise, internal personnel can do it. Understanding the corruption risk assessment tool and the steps. Corruption risk assessment is a diagnostic tool which seeks to identify weaknesses within a system which may present opportunities for corruption to occur. This is by Nyasi T. Chakunte Rukein, former executive director of DI Cameroon. It differs from many other corruption assessment tools and that it focuses on the potential for rather than the perception, existence, or extent of corruption. The purpose of a corruption risk assessment is usually to supplement evidence of actual or perceived corruption in a given context in order to inform anti-corruption strategies and policies or for advocacy purposes. It can also serve as a baseline for anti-corruption work to track changes in risks over time. Corruption risk assessment can be applied at all levels, from government institutions to donor support programs down to the sectoral programs, as well as in individual organizations or units. Further stages in the assessment may include prioritization of risks, identification of tools to address the identified risks, the guidance on the development of anti-corruption strategies. Moreover, it can serve to visualize the relationships between different risks and the actors and identify specific areas where limited resources can be most effectively channeled. The results of a risk assessment can be presented in a number of ways. In some cases, risks are visualized through a corruption risk map, which highlights key stages, actors, and all relationships in the process and analysis. Another visual tool is the corruption risk matrix, which is often used to prioritize risks. More often than not, however, results are either presented in a tabular form or as a checklist. In detail, the steps of an integrity deficit mapping exercise are as follows. A. Identification of activities. The first step in mapping integrity deficits is to present in detail all of the activities that are carried out within the framework of a given function or position, a service, or sector. B. Identification of stakeholders. The actors taken into account in the mapping exercise are identified according to the relationship they have with a given function, service, or sector. For each activity, it is possible to identify several actors having direct or indirect relationship with the manager, the unit, or the sector under study. It is also possible to identify actors both at the national and the local levels. C. Identification of integrity deficits. Identification of the integrity gaps is made in relation to clearly defined activities within a given function, service, or sector. This exercise helps to identify integrity deficits that exist or could further jeopardize good governance in a given function, unit, or sector. D. Manifestations of integrity deficits. Each integrity deficit is explained in detail. It helps in understanding how it manifests itself or could occur in a given environment. For example, assuming that the integrity deficit in a given environment is primary, it will be necessary to explain precisely how it is or could be made, by whom, and for what purpose. E. Rating of the integrity deficit. Each integrity deficit receives a score on the basis of two aspects: impact and probability. The impact refers to the question: what could be the impact of this integrity deficit in a given environment if it is effective or real? Probability, on the other hand, raises the question: what is the probability that this integrity deficit could occur? The impact of the integrity deficit and the probability of this deficit occurred are classified in scales 0 to 5. F. Rating and prioritization of integrity deficit. The score of the integrity deficit in a given environment is the product of the impact and the probability of the integrity deficit. That is, impact times probability. Prioritization of the deficit is done by ranking from the highest deficit to the lowest one. G. Identification of instruments to fight against corruption. This identification follows the prioritization of the integrity deficits and thus makes it possible at the same time to become aware of the tools that are absent in the fight against corruption in a given environment and or to evaluate the changes to be made in relation to integrity deficits presenting the highest risk amongst all. In summary or in conclusion, there are risks in most situations. Risk management is an important element of corporate governance, and every organization should review their risk status, develop their approach as described in the SIMA risk management cycle. Managing the risk of fraud is the same in principle as managing any other business risk. First, the potential consequences of fraud or corruption on the organization need to be understood using the principles set out in this lesson. The risks should then be reduced by developing and implementing an anti-fraud or anti-corruption strategy across the organization. This is best approached systematically, both at the organization level, for example, by using ethics policies and anti-fraud or corruption policies, and at the operational level through introduction of controls and procedures. The following lessons will be expounding more on how fraud risk management can be carried out in the context of anti-fraud and corruption control. I can see there are no questions, and therefore I hang up until almost 12 hours, 10 to 12 hours from now, when I will come online to deliver another lesson. Thank you and bye bye.